Hear the voice of God. Feel intimidating. Great. All right, well, good morning all, and welcome to our Bible study for August 18th. And since we'd finished the Sunday School Stories series for the summer, and didn't want to start anything because we won't meet the next 2 weeks for adult Bible class, I figured we could just do a quick little one-off thing. And since I used that opening story in my sermon today about the pastor who does religious demographics and how his church closed, I figured we'd take a look at some of his work and see what that can tell us about the rise of the nuns. N-O-N-E-S, not N-U-N-S. There's not as many N-U-N-S nuns. There's lots more N-O-N-E-S nuns. So, all right, there we go. So again, Ryan Berg is a professor at Eastern Illinois University in Charleston. But then he's been a pastor in Mount Vernon, which I looked at south of Effingham. So that's a bit of a commute for him. From 2006 until this past summer, or about a month ago, when the church closed. He's started getting a graduate degree in political science. He'd been a youth minister beforehand, and so the church job was kind of on the side while he was doing that, and then kept it going. But through his use of statistics and demographics and things, and this idea of religious disengagement was kind of ended up being his focus. And because he was able to put it in graphical forms that could be easily shared on social media, he went viral a couple times, and that's part of how he got into all of this. And he was also a student at Greenville, Norm, so I don't know whether he would have known Carly or not. But, all right, so the nuns, who are the nuns? He's got three subgroups for how he defines what a nun is. And there's atheists, there's agnostics, and a group called nothing in particular. But if you had 5 nuns, 1 would be atheist, 1 would be agnostic, and 3 would be nothing in particular. So a lot of times when we think of people who aren't religious, aren't in the church, we think of people who are almost militantly atheist, or dealing with questions in agnostic, but it's kind of more of a nothing in particular seems to be the more popular one, at least what gets picked up in surveys and stuff. All right, but why is this important? So if you look at the share of Americans with no religious affiliation, starting here in the early 70s, and then all the way up here, 25 to 30% at present. But note when is the big jump? Well, we get a big jump here, of course, and some of that's COVID, and we'll talk about that. But really, the big jump's here in the 90s. We're just kind of seeing the results of that really coming through, now. So again, the group of Americans with no religious affiliation, nuns, was about 5% of the adult population in the 1970s, 7% in 91. Now it's about 30% who, if asked, would say they have no religious affiliation. So a bit of a change. And again, in the 90s, and especially among 18 to 35-year-olds, that's down 14% and up 12% in the 90s. Seems to be the biggest jump. We'll get into some, or at least some possible reasons. Of course, it's social science. We can't actually figure out real reasons. There's do surveys and things, but always multiple factors, and trying to figure out which one's causal is one of the things he kind of focuses on too. But all right, so if we were looking, just in Iowa, where 27% nuns in 2008, 40% nuns in 2022. So, but it's like almost every every state's over 30% in 2022, except for the Dakotas, which I imagine there might be at least some survey bias with the small populations there. But and the change in the share of people attending religious services from 2008 to 2020, some of these I just thought were kind of interesting. So in Iowa, 7.3% decrease in those who attend religious worship services. Wyoming and South Dakota went up. A lot of other places, most other places went down. And if American religion was represented by 100 people, this is how he graphed it. So 40 would be, yeah, the row 10, it's a square 10 by 10, so 40 would be Protestant, but do that then, 18% nothing, 18 nothing in particular, 5 agnostics for atheists, Buddhist, Jewish here, Catholic, Mormon, Orthodox. So again, kind of a little more change, a little more diverse than have been in the past. And so, and again, the rise of the nuns over from 2008 to 2022, while the share of atheists and agnostics rises a bit, that stays fairly steady. It's kind of the nothing in particular that seems to be the group that's increasing the most. All right. Any thoughts, questions, comments thus far?
In Iowa is 40.
Yeah, I am too.
Yeah.
That's a big surprise.
All right, so why is there an increase in the nuns? A few different possibilities or reasons. One of the things that sociologists have thought for a while has been this idea of secularization, that as a society gains higher levels of educational achievement and economic prosperity, the result is a move away from religion. Which generally this graph kind of makes sense. So what's the GDP per capita and the percent saying religious is important? So religion's very important in poorer countries and not so important in wealthier countries is the general trend. But of course, U.S. is an outlier, so that's a little different. Doesn't totally explain it. Seems to explain what, some of what happened in Europe and elsewhere, but doesn't necessarily explain the United States. Yeah, Don.
I always remember Pastor Kaffer, who had been here in the 80s.
Right.
He made the comment, he says, the United States is becoming more like Europe.
Yep.
And Africa will be the place of growth.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's what we're seeing. Yeah, there's here, what's the top country here? Religion's important? Ethiopia. So, I mean, there's the church, the Mekane Yesu Church is the largest Lutheran church body in the world. I mean, sometimes Sweden's considered the most largest, but that's because it's a state church, so they've got a lot of members, but not a whole lot of attendees. But yeah, usually there's more Lutherans in Madagascar than there are Missouri Synod Lutherans. It's what we kind of gets called the global South. Yeah, is kind of where the religious growth is happening, and Europe and North America are somewhat becoming almost post-Christian in a sense. But the United States isn't following quite the same trend as Europe. It's similar, but not quite exactly. So secularization seems to could play a part in this. But again, the United States is an outlier. It's more religious than expected, if that's the big reason of secularization, is once you get, again, as economic prosperity increases, religiosity decreases. Because why do you need God if science has said there's no need for God and you're able to do all right economically and not dependent on God as much for daily bread and things. So, yeah, Connie.
Do you think the effect of changing from primary professions being agricultural, where there's more of a dependence on weather and things that are out of your control, to urbanization.
I think that seems to have a role to play. I don't know how big a role. I mean, that's been happening for generations, and this rise in or decline in religiosity is more recent than that, but I think that probably plays a role too.
On the other hand, Christianity originally was urban.
Right.
And if you look at places like where the mission area is big, it's urban. Like in Africa, it's an urban thing. Because when the country people are a pagan religion, they're more inclined to that than the people in the city. So in those kinds of situations, it's just the opposite. But here, I guess just the fact that people in the country are more conservative and hold the old ways more than people in the cities. But that's true when the old way was Christianity, but not in other ways.
All right. Another thing he talks about is social desirability bias, that people lie on survey questions because they want to look good in the eyes of the person conducting the survey. So when Christianity was popular in culture, then more people would lie and say they were connected to churches than they actually were. And he gives an example in his book, I can't remember, but they do a county analysis of how many people say they are Christian in that county, and then they went and checked all the churches they could about membership records and things, and it was something like 30% of the county said they were Christian, and 18% were actually on rolls somewhere. So people lie, and then maybe people lie. Maybe it works the other way now. So the idea is that the shift could have happened earlier, but cultural Christianity kind of kept people in the church longer. People would say they were Christian longer than they necessarily actually were, because there was that social pressure to stay in. Another thing, so again, if this is happening in the 90s and then accelerating from there, what big thing happened in the 90s? Rise of the internet. So again, people are exposed to more differing ideas than in the past and able to find community in places other than face-to-face. So it's one thing if you're maybe having doubts about Christianity, but if there's no one around that seems to doubt like you're not going to necessarily vocalize them as much or admit to those as much. But if you can find someone on the internet that does that too, or you can find all the arguments against Christianity on the internet from people, and maybe that drives people out, that kind of thing. So some of those kind of ideas are perhaps why this is happening. Politics. Again, there's a stronger connection between conservative churches and conservative political parties. Again, that happened kind of with the rise of the moral majority and stuff in the 80s and 90s, and then if you're a more moderate or liberal, but in a conservative church, that's going to be a disconnect that's going to make you leave. And then the liberal churches, the mainline churches, are where the decline's happening the fastest. So maybe that's got part of it. And again, in 1978, half of all weekly white churchgoers identified as Democrats. Today, only a quarter do. So, churches used to be a place where people of differing political beliefs at least mixed, and that's happening less now. Our partisanship of white weekly church-going Christians from 1972 to 2001, again, kind of mid 80s is where that inflection point seems to be, and now more Republican than Democrat. Why? Things involved in the conflict between politics and religion, culture war stuff, religious right, focus on abortion, homosexuality, etc. Racism. Private schools used religion as a way to avoid desegregation in the South, especially. Economics, the idea that free market capitalism and religion were used against the rise of socialism and communism. When we added in God we trust and stuff like that, although that's more 50s, 60s of, it's that we're the Christian West against the godless communists. And so then as time went on, anything even remotely seeming communist or socialist gets condemned by Christians and things like that. Again, and liberals are more likely to be nuns than conservatives, so that's another aspect of it. All right, and then another factor is just social isolation. People stop joining groups, and churches are just caught up in that desocialization. In the year 2000, Robert Putnam, a sociologist, wrote a book called Bowling Alone. That in the 1960s, 8% of adult males were in a bowling league, and it was 3% in the 90s. Described as a retreat from active social life. So people aren't joining any organization, any institution. How are the Kiwanis doing? Yeah. Right. Yeah. So lots of those kind of social groups that people would join are happening less and less, and so people are joining those groups less and less, and so churches are just kind of caught up in that, and that's part of the reason going on. And loss of trust in institutions, kind of going along with that. Watergate and Bill Clinton's affairs led to distrust in government. 77 trusted the U.S. government in 1964, 17% did in 2018. So. Yeah. So if you're not trusting an institution, any institution, then churches get caught up in that too. We also have, the Catholic Church sex abuse scandal leads to distrust in especially the Catholic Church, but other church bodies have had similar sex abuse scandals. And even if it doesn't happen on a denominational level, when something like that happens at a congregational level, that has ripple effects. All right, and then I think this is the last one. Changes in family structure. Share of young adults who are married between ages of 25 to 39 was 78% or 75%ish in 1960 and below 50% 2021. But again, and this is something that is kind of interesting that he's picked up on his research too. Educational attainment, a lot of times our stereotype is that people who leave religion do so because they went to a public university and got exposed to all sorts of ideas, but it's not education seems to actually improve religiosity. It's people who have a high school degree or less that are dropping out. Share of never married adults from 1970 to 2018 was 7% for both groups in 1970, but by 2018 here, 23% of those with higher income and 42% of those with lower income were never married. Now you've got people living together and creating family units that way without the official marriage thing, but that's kind of what's that going on to. All right, so the group most likely to be a nun, they're not married and they don't have any kids. Because usually we talk about the life cycle effect that, why do you go to church? Well, your parents made you go. But then you spend time finding your own way. But then when you get married, and especially when you have kids, that's when you go back, either because of the reconnection or you want your children to have some sort of moral foundation. But then once you're an empty nester, do I really like church? Do I really want to go? And then that either helps you draw closer or drift away. And so part of the problem that's been going on too is that the gap between, in young adulthood, is longer. The gap between if you were active when your parents made you go and people get active again when they get married and have kids. If people aren't getting married or aren't getting married as soon or getting married later in life, then there's a longer gap where they haven't been active, and that's then once there's been that longer gap, why would people come back in? So that's part of what's going on too. All right. Any questions on anything thus far, or thoughts or questions?
Did you say anything about immigration?
I didn't see any. He didn't cover a whole lot of immigration. This was kind of more focusing in on.
More and more people emigrating from non-Christian cultures than we used to. It used to be most of our immigrants came from Europe, supposedly Christian cultures. And then we have so many more immigrants coming from non-Christian cultures.
Yeah, and that probably plays a part of it too. Although where was it? I think it was when he was here. President Turner made the point that I hadn't ever thought of before, that in Iowa we get more Christian immigrants because if they're working at a meat processing plant, especially a pork meat processing plant, you're not going to get people from Muslim countries to come and work there. So you're going to have Christian, for what that's worth.
But if you go see a doctor, he's from India.
Yep. Yeah, Don.
What about percent of the kids that are baptized? Was there some data on that?
That's a good question. I meant to dig into some of the more specific LCMS trends that they've been looking at, and I didn't get a chance to. So, but yeah, I mean, the joke that I always use with that is that there's a church that has a mouse problem. Trustees do all they can to try and figure out, can't do anything. Pastor finally says, okay, I'm going to take care of it. And after 1 week, half of them are gone, and after 2 weeks, all of them are gone. And trustees ask, well, what did you do? How did you get rid of the mice? He goes, oh, well, I baptized them the first week and confirmed them the second. Now they'll never darken the door of the church again. But I mean, and so, when the leaving church happens, it's, as much as we focus in on kind of the 18 to 25-year-old range sometimes in that, it's sometimes that 13 to 18-year-old range is almost more important. That's when more people leave, and we'll touch on some of those here in a bit too. So if we're talking about atheists, so again, that subgroup of nuns, so not those who just believe nothing in particular, but those who are, adamantly atheist. 60% men, 40% women, and that's the most imbalanced, gender imbalanced religious group in America today. But their atheists are only 6% of the population, small compared to the 22% that are nothing in particulars. So again, when we think of people who aren't religious, more of them are just kind of vague, nothing in particular, than necessarily adamantly against God. A lot of the nuns, though, not doing well socioeconomically, least educated religious group. Share who have here. Only 25% of nothing in particular have a college degree. So you can see how, a lot of times we think, oh, it's obviously, going away to college, that's when people lose the faith. Well, no, it's really the higher education you have, the less likely you are to have no religious affiliation. And that's been pretty consistent over these years. 60% of nothing in particulars make less than $50,000 a year. A third, and a third of them have a high school diploma or less. falling behind educationally and in terms of income. They're struggling, left out, left behind, lost, unmoored, disconnected from larger society, feel like society doesn't work for them, and so that leads to a lot of course, bad outcomes if you think society is not working for you, or you have no place in society. All right. 15% of folks who say that religion is nothing in particular, though, actually attended a religious service at least once a month, which is kind of interesting. All right. Then also kind of not overlapping Venn diagram here. Sociologists talk about the three important things for people to be connected to a religious community: believing, behaving, and belonging. So believing is the kind of intellectual assent to doctrine stuff. Behaving is following the social norms of the religious group. And then belonging is, do I feel welcome? Am I part of the community kind of thing? And so again, there's some overlap in all three, but it's not necessarily the intellectual beliefs. They're not following what the religion says, and they're don't feel like they belong. That's social isolation seems to be the big factor. So, all right. Any thoughts, questions, comments? All right. All right, and then just a kind of quick touch. One of the other books that this Ryan Burge got helped on, he wasn't the main driver behind it. It was a book called The Great Dechurching that came out about a year ago, and it was two pastors in Orlando who realized how much Orlando had changed in the past 20 years, and so since Dr. Burge does all this religious demographic stuff, got him to come and check and see what had happened and why people had left the church. And bulk, so why do people leave the church? They moved. So 22% people said why did they leave the church? They moved. And so they didn't get reconnected to a new one once they moved. Inconvenient, that it didn't fit in their schedule, and that kind of covers a lot of the busyness of kids or whatever. So yeah, Connie.
Yeah, I think under inconvenient, the effect of youth sports is certainly a factor.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Family change, marriage, divorce, had a kid, empty nest, those kind of things. 15%, so that's why they left the church. Out of habit due to COVID was 15%. Didn't fit in with the congregation for whatever reason. Again, some of that's political, some of that's social, some of it's other things, but didn't fit with the congregation, and then didn't experience much love from the congregation was 12%, so that's why. So.
That occurred in the morning,
What?
the first time out of habit.
Yeah.
Before COVID and after COVID, our attendance changed.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we could probably see all these things here. All right, and so then again, along with this, so this is why people leave. Why do people come back? And the possible reasons they come back is the social, church, or service opportunities seem to be the big ones, or big avenues for why people come back. Why social? They have new friends that are going to church and say, come along. Or they want to get connected with a social group. I meant to mention this earlier in this part. One of the things some of you know, one of the groups that we work with on our service ministry stuff is Home for a While. Cornerstone kind of runs it, but some other churches in town are involved too. It provides 90-day housing for a family to kind of get back, have a chance to kind of take a breath, get back on their feet, and get back into an apartment. So it's people on the, either homeless or on the verge of homelessness, and try and give them some breathing room. And one of the things we try and do, though, is to get them connected with a church community, just because of the social connections that can happen there. That a lot of these people are isolated, or the people that they're socially engaged with are not good influences on them, and so they're estranged from family, or their family's all in similar situations of barely making ends meet. And
Could you share, Pastor Dave,
Yeah.
with the people, how you know this? I mean, your role with.
Okay, and so one of the things that so I participate along with representatives from the other churches involved in the monthly interviews with these people, as we figure out who has an apartment. The idea is we have an apartment opening up every month, so it's somewhat small, but and so getting to hear those stories, and usually it's people who were maybe doing okay, but family situation happened. We get some referrals from like Access, the domestic abuse shelter. So that.
Pastor Dave is not telling us this second and first hymn.
Right. Yeah. And so we get referrals from the Bridge Home, from the homeless shelter, things like that. And so. All right, so why do people come? Again, social, new friends, church, that they'd been connected with the church in the past, then for some reason they either realize that they're missing something and decide to go, or they left a church because it wasn't a good fit for them anymore for whatever reason, and then come back and then find a church a good church for however they understand that, and decide to come back. God tells them to return. Again, that was work by evangelicals, so you get a kind of not quite a voice of God saying you should go back to church. But we're open to the Spirit working in some of that way too. That you should go back to church. And then service opportunities, that they get involved with a church because they're looking for service opportunities, and the church has some, and they help with that, and then that gets them into the belonging part of the community, and then and then they start attending services again, that kind of thing. So those are some ways that they've seen why people come back if they've left. All right, any questions, thoughts, comments on that? Yeah, Don.
People leave the church because of financial reasons.
What do you mean by financial reasons?
Feel like they have to contribute to the church and can't afford to.
I don't know whether it's necessarily that. I think sometimes it's they don't feel they fit in socio-economically. That there's some of that going on. I don't know that
Your friends change.
Yeah.
Your friends change. Change the social.
Yeah. So I mean that's some, not necessarily financial in terms of you feel you're supposed to give more to the church than you do, but in terms of if your economic situation changes and you don't feel a part of equal with the community, or however, again, I think that's sometimes an issue. Sure. Yeah, Connie.
I think one thing about this church that to me makes it very welcoming is the fact that casual dress is okay.
Okay.
You see people wearing shorts in the summer. You don't have to have a coat and tie.
Right.
And which some people don't even own. A lot of college students,
Right.
unless they're in a fraternity, don't even own.
Yeah.
And
Well, I mean, they have to for like career fairs, but yeah.
if you notice, my husband hasn't worn a coat and tie probably for 20 years.
Yeah.
You go to the rural congregations, they don't either.
Yeah. So I mean, that's kind of a more general cultural thing. But yeah, that certainly again contributes to my feelings of belonging, if I'm dressed the same way or not, or if my dress makes me stick out in a negative way.
When I came here 40 years ago, who was the best dressed group of people?
Not the pastors.
students. The students, the people were already casual, but the students, guys who come in coats, guys, girls in dresses, they were the best dressed people, because they were coming from conservative communities like that.
Well, kids don't dress up to go to church in their home churches.
Right.
They don't anymore, they don't have to.
Yeah.
That's changed. You look at the old pictures of World Series, for instance. You see all the men had coats and ties and hats on. That won't happen today.
All right. Any other thoughts? All right. Then the book on the nuns ends with the parable, a description of the parable of the sower, which of course we've got the window here. And he says, the winds of secularization and polarization are swirling like never before. Most of the seed is going to fall on rocky soil, never to reap a harvest. And it seems like there are fewer people to spread the seed every year. It's easy to give up hope. But we must recall the words of the Apostle Paul to the church in Galatia. Let us not grow weary in doing what is right, for we will reap at harvest time if we do not give up. Seed that expresses the love and grace and hope of Jesus Christ is never truly lost. Don't give up. So, all right, final thoughts, questions, comments? All right, well, great. Well, thank you for coming. No adult class the next 2 weeks. We'll start up again on when Sunday school starts up again on the 8th. Yeah, Connie.
One thing I think both you and Pastor Mark do a good job of connecting new people with people in the congregation who have something in common.
Yep.
And it's always concerned me now that we have the coffee hour downstairs and there's no way to really capture those people to have a long conversation with. I just got back from Boston and they have this courtyard outside and they have a major coffee hour.
Right.
And the thing is that people walking by there to go shopping also see, it's almost like a party.
Right.
You think, wow, what is this?
Yep.
And it's primarily because there are a lot of families with young children and also college students and young adults. The food keeps them there
Right.
long enough so they can
Yeah.
have a conversation.
Yeah.
And of course, ours is kind of hidden away.
Well, and it's only after early service too. I mean, but that's why again we'll have the meal downstairs next week
But I think the
to
welcome
get
to
people.
have dinner is
Yeah.
wonderful.
Yep. Good. Yeah.
So maybe we should convert that library, the old pastor's office, into a coffee bar.
Well, it's still a little tucked away, but I mean, again, some ideas of how to be more welcoming is.
People,
yeah.
people don't want to hang around though, so you
Yeah.
invite them and they don't want to hang around.
Yeah.
They are invited.
having those opportunities for unhurried time. I'm trying to remember. I know Greg, when we looked at the Joining Jesus on his mission book, he had an equation. There was something about unhurried time and people as part of what creates connection. But just finding opportunities for that. I mean, or that's another way that. Like the one-on-one conversation partners with internationals, it works well because you have that unhurried time of people willing to connect and needing to practice English, and creates opportunities that way. So.
Well, when we need somebody, we can always invite them downstairs.
Oh,
yeah. Too.
Yep.
And, because
And
sometimes
that personal connection, personal invitation is going to do work
out to
better.
that
Yeah.
person the next Sunday. I'll try to find them and,
Right.
say hi again.
Yeah. No. There's you're somewhere where people know your name. We're not Cheers, but close. Yeah.
To get people involved in something.
Yeah.
Whether it's choir or whether it's
Yeah.
whatever. And in the worship during the week, I think that has been very successful here.
Yeah, and so creating the opportunities for touches, for connection points with people is certainly important. So.
To the extent of their availability, so
Right.
they don't feel like if they can't do everything that.
Yeah, that contributes to the belonging too. Like, that if everyone's doing everything and they're not in, so. All right, good. So, all right. Well, thank you all again for coming. Welcome lunch. next week. So join us for that, and yeah, meet all the new students. Great, thank you.